my original desire was to try and make the audio that we did in BBC Radio sound like the audio that I was hearing in a cinema. And really, in the late 80s, early 90s, I would go out from BBC Radio Light Entertainment, where I was a senior producer, and I would have a popcorn lunch, which meant I would go to the cinema down in Regent Street or Leicester Square and watch a movie. And I was kind of watching with my ears, really, because what I was about to do the adventures of Superman. We'd done a Superman documentary and Batman. So I wanted to find out ways in which we could make the sound we were using more dynamic. And of course, part of that recipe was Dolby Surround at that time. And so researching what was possible sonically, we ended up encoding our Superman and Batman productions in the early 90s in Dolby Surround, Pro Logic, which was the old way of doing it, where phase error basically gave you a rear channel. And it was pretty successful. It worked pretty well. The center speaker, the center channel, tended to pull dialogue frequencies in. So if you wanted to pan a character hard right or hard left, you had to really, really pan them. So there were ups and downs, but generally it gave a more cinematic sound. That and the digital technology, which I discovered at a studio called the Soundhouse in West London were already doing, meant that we could really make it sound quite dynamic. So carrying that on a dozen years later, after Douglas Adams had heard the Supermans and the Batmans and asked me if I would bring the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy back to radio, to its original home, and was very enthused at the idea of using surround. When we finally did do Hitchhikers in the 2000s, tragically after Douglas had died, it was always my priority to try and record them in a surround format of some kind. And at that time, we were using Dolby AC3, which was still front left, front right, rear left, rear right, subwoofer, center channel. And the difference was then, of course, digital technology allowed us to discreetly pan a voice to the rear left or rear right, which when you collapse to mono wouldn't disappear. But then, of course, the problem is you couldn't collapse that to mono like you could Dolby Pro Logic, because it wasn't encoded in a stereo signal. It was discrete digital channels. The interesting thing about working that way, and the thing that I found slightly challenging, was that it ended up with sort of theatre in the round backwards, where you, the audience, were in the middle of the actors working around you. And in a cinema, it works because you have a single focal point, which is basically one end of the room. When you're working in pure sound, it's slightly tricky to tell a story where the audience is within the action. An intimate scene between characters front left and rear right is kind of weird across a living room. So there were kind of dramatic considerations where I wasn't sure we were quite pulling off what I wanted to do. On the other hand, there were moments like where Ford Prefect was pursuing a flying robot around the room, where we actually took one stereo pair one way and one stereo pair the other way, and had him run around with a speaker on a cable, me carrying the speaker on the cable and gradually being bound up like the mummy. But we got a sort of true surround effect. But after that, I felt that we'd hit a kind of a wall creatively. Not that surround isn't great, but simply because in order to tell the story, I feel the audience does have to have a focal point of some kind. I think you have to establish where your proscenium arch is a little bit in audio. So coming to the new series of Hitchhikers, at the moment we're in stereo only, although the mixdown could easily be reworked into some sort of surround format. And on the titles like Alien I've been doing for Audible, I've been using more sort of artificial binaural for some of the effects. Aliens, sort of sneaking around, or you hiding from aliens who sneak around behind you, that kind of thing. But I would love to play again with surround, and I'm particularly interested in the opportunities that VR provides. And what's really interesting and what I love about this is that when we finally got the deal through to do Hitchhikers, or rather the deal to do it in the early 90s collapsed, Douglas and I kind of shrugged and sadly and went our separate ways. And then around about the year 2000, he actually we got in touch with each other again. No, I beg your pardon, 1997. We got in touch again, and he said, would you like to come to the digital village where I'm working, because I've had an idea for something. So I went and we saw each other, and he said, I've got this really great idea about a video game with no pictures. It's all done in sound, and it's a sort of virtual reality thing. And it was a game where basically you navigate entirely through sound using the virtues of surround. So in a way, Douglas Adams actually predicted the VR world that we're in now. And I think the challenge is, can we bring that? Can we bring audio production, which has suddenly become such a big thing? 25 years ago, I thought maybe people will be listening to this in 10 years if we're lucky. Now everybody's listening because we've got the internet, we've got smartphones and so on. So down the road, will we be plugged into vision-free virtual reality? I think there's a good chance we are. So thanks, Douglas Adams. You probably predicted that as well.